Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Nasser, and this is the Cleveland C# VB.NET user group. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening. A little bit about the group. The meetings are free of charge, and they're held monthly, typically every fourth Thursday. We cover a variety of different topics related to .NET, and we keep the meetings free of charge and open to the public. You can find meeting information for both past as well as future events on meetup.com with the link listed below at the bottom of the slide. I'd like to give a big thank you to our sponsors. They've supported us before COVID and will continue to support us after COVID. So a big thank you to Tech Systems for sponsoring the space, iNeedle for sponsoring the pizza and the drinks, PostSharp for taking care of some of the prizes, and NIS Technologies for covering the web hosting fees. Just some general information. Please keep in mind participation is always encouraged despite the virtual meeting. Also, we'll be entertaining questions either via chat or verbally, so feel free to jump in at any point in time with a question. However, if you're not asking a question or commenting, kindly ask you to mute your microphones to avoid any background noise. Also, let's try to make it as much of a roundtable discussion as much as possible, and the more interactive, the more it's going to be beneficial for everyone. Tonight's presentation is Chris Woodruff, also known as Woody. He's going to be presenting on what's new in Entity Framework Core 5. Chris is a team leader of developer relations at Quicken Loans. He has over 25 years of experience, and he actually remembers back from the 80s what CompuServe was all about and what it was like to live without the internet, just like yours truly. He's been an expert in database development, APIs, as well as web development. He's also been a proven mentor, and he helps and enjoys educating others and helping them with the training and education as well as speaking. You can find his blog over at chriswoodruff.com, and he's also very active on Twitter at cwoodruff. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Chris, and let me make you presenter, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Hopefully we can meet physically sometime soon, but in any case, that we'll start now. So we're going to talk about Entity Framework Core 5. So I've actually done this talk since Entity Framework Core 1.0 came out, and I like this talk because, you know what, I learned probably more about this stuff than the person, everyone out there who's listening, because I really enjoy this, and there's a lot of interesting things in Entity Framework that people don't know about. And I wish I had more time. I'd go back and do what's new in Entity Framework Core 3.1, because there's some really cool stuff back then. But you can take a look at my demos and my slide deck. I'll tell you where to find both of these code bases and the slide decks. Okay. So we're going to go over 9 things. So we're not going to go over DbContextFactory in this one. When I first developed this talk, I kind of went through and found all the ones I was interested in, and I am not interested in the DbContextFactory anymore. It's not that great. It's really just around for Blazor. So if you do Blazor, you can read up on that. I'm going to replace it with another item, but you guys are my guinea pigs. You guys are getting this for the first time. So you're going to see all the warts, and hopefully you'll see lots of shiny pennies, as Keith Elder and I used to say back in the Deep Fried Bites days when we did that podcast. But you're probably going to see some rusty washers. So bear with me. If you have questions, just break in and ask, because these are all interesting things. So like Sam said, my name's Chris Woodruff. I work at Quicken Loans. So we do Rocket Mortgage, and you can get my email on this. And again, Twitter is probably the best way to get a hold of me. and that's at C Woodruff. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about many-to-many. So for a long time, we couldn't do a many-to-many relationship without doing a lot of custom coding within Entity Framework Core. But we finally have it, and I will demonstrate it. So basically, what it looks like, if you had two C# POCO objects, so we see the two classes here, one's a post and one is tag. So think of this as a blog application. So you can see that a post can have multiple tags, one or more tags in a collection that is associated with that post. And on the other side, a tag can also have a collection of the posts that it has been associated with. So that gives us the many-to-many relationship. So what happens when we're creating the DB context, and we'll take a look at the code in a second, but I just wanted to walk through this. When we're inside the DB context on configuring, and we are going through and standing up the model using the model builder, you can see that for the post, we have has many tags, and underneath the last part of this code line says using entity, and then in there is toTable. Now this is where we can reference the table that is the join table. So in the database world, when we're creating databases, if we're creating a many-to-many relationship between two tables, and say we have a table called posts and a table called tags, well, we have to have that join table to give that many-to-many relationship. And for this database, that table is called post tag. It's a join that basically will just have a post ID and a tag ID, and that will allow us to go at it from either side on a many-to-many relationship. And then you can also see that we're using the same code standard down on the second model builder line, and that is for the tag. And again, we're saying a tag has many posts. And then the last part of this is saying using entity and giving that table name. So that's just saying that both of these entities will use the post tag for its many relationships, for the post, the tags, and for the tag, the posts. So let me see if I can jump over to the code. It's on the same screen. Sam, can you see my IDE?
Yes, sir. All good.
Okay, awesome. So what we have here is a many-to-many, and these are all just console apps. I like to build my demos for EF Core just as simple as possible, so with the least amount of files. So in here, I have a program file, and I also have a thing called blog service that basically will just let me go out and search blogs. So in here, I have just a line that goes out and finds the blog that has fish in it, and it returns it. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part, again, is down inside the creation of the DB context. So on model creating, so you'll see down here, I basically have that line of code that we looked at before, and it's just that simple. You build it, and you get a one-to-many. Now, if I jumped over, and I've already run this, so I'm going to bring in SQL Server Management Studio, and I'm going to show you guys this database. So we'll jump down to demo.many-to-many, and I want to prove that it actually created this table. So you can see that, and I'm sorry if it's a little small, but we do have a blog table. We have that post table that has the post ID, the title, content of the post, and then the blog ID back to knowing what blog that the post is on. Now, this does not have anything related to the tags. And if I take a look at the tag table, again, it's going to have just tag ID in the name. Doesn't have anything with the regarding any of the posts that it's related to. Now, in that line, line that we looked at for the model builder, it said that we were going to use the table post tag, and yes, that table is here, and it does have two columns on it. One's called posts, post ID, and the other one's called tags, tag ID. Now, this table was created from Entity Framework Core. So this is a table that was created using whatever convention that EF Core 5 uses. So that's why it used the name of the table and then the foreign key that it's referencing. So that's why it has a slightly kind of strange looking column name. So and in here, if I come in here and say select the top 1,000, you can see that there are some tags. So these tags have GUIDs for their ID, and these posts have int for their ID. So that's the join. So we now have many-to-many relationships. So if you have any questions, please just ask.
There's a question in chat from Jeff. He's asking if ID, post ID, and tag ID will infer that they're properties on the post tag table by convention.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So that all comes about down here when I created those classes. So for blog, I did use blog ID. Now I could use ID, and it would move those over when it created the blog table. Entity Framework Core would create a primary key on that table called ID. It will create whatever the property name that you give for the class, especially if you give it the key attribute. So this attribute is just telling someone to or telling Entity Framework that this is the primary key of the table that will be stored in the database. And you can see down here that post ID and tag ID. So it wasn't auto created that way. I actually wrote the code to tell Entity Framework Core that I wanted those names for each one of those classes and tables in the back end.
Sure. This is Jeff, by the way. I appreciate the. I'm really kind of just getting started with Entity Framework, and I'm using 3.1 at this point. But yeah, these kinds of relationships really kind of threw me for a loop when I was getting started. I've kind of made a conscious decision, I guess, to go totally fluent. To get the full power and keep the POCOs kind of as clean as I can.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my follow-on question, then the primary key on this blog tag or tag blog table, whatever that is, then would be a composite key between the two fields?
Yeah, so
rather than inserting an ID, if you will.
Yep. So a join table does have a composite key. So if I go in there and take a look at that table, and I'll just go in and take a look at it from a designer standpoint.
Indexes, keys.
You can see that both of the columns are have been referenced as together as a primary key, which is a composite primary key. Yep.
Awesome. Excellent. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's interesting that it chose an NVAR care instead of a unique identifier for the GUID.
Yeah. If you give it the string, it will infer a GUID. Yeah. So GUIDs and sometimes GUIDs are good if you need a universal identifier. Sure. And an int's good if you don't need that universal identifier that needs to kind of go and live everywhere. Especially if you have multiple databases or charred data or like split up databases, or if you have some other scenario. So I usually just do int, and when I created this tag object, I use string for this, just to show something different.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep. Good.
Cool. So we'll go back to the slide deck. We looked at our demo. So the next one is split queries. So interesting thing. Before Entity Framework Core 3, you were not guaranteed that all of the query processor would be done on the SQL server or on the database server if you were using Oracle or MySQL or any other supported database engine for EF Core. So back in the old days, with EF, like normal .NET Framework EF and early versions of EF Core, what would happen is if you had a filter on your link statement, that would actually go out, grab all of the information, potentially. It depended on situations, and some of that filtering would be done on the client, on wherever the query was being called, wherever your .NET code was being run, which caused a lot of inefficiencies, and a lot of people didn't like how EF and EF Core did that. So with EF Core 3, the team at Microsoft decided, we're not going to do any more client-side processing. Everything's going to be done at the server side, and we will get a true result set back as if you were calling what you thought would be the SQL statement going to the server. Well, by doing that, they added some inefficiencies to some queries, especially queries that had include in them. So in this case, this is using a database called Chinook, and we want to get back all the artists from the database. So these are artists, music artists, and we want to get back a set of albums for each one of those artists. So in this link statement, that's what we're saying. We're saying grab all of the artists, but also bring back all of the albums for each one of those artists. Now, if you created a single select statement that represented this, it might be very inefficient. So a DBA might look at it and go, wow, this is just putting a lot of a lot of wear on my database server, because it would do this left join. And left joins can be inefficient if there's a lot of data in your database. So the Microsoft, the EF core team said, you know what, let's try to work out a compromise. We don't want to bring and have to do any processing power on the client side, but we want to still do everything on the server side. So they came up with this idea of a split query. Now, split query, if you add this to your link statement, this directive called as split query, what this will do is it will create multiple select statements. What it will do is create the first one, which will get back all the artists. And then for each artist, it will actually call a separate select statement for each one of those artist ID to get back the albums. And it will get all of those result sets back, and it will bring all that data back, and EF Core will put it all together, just like if you're running the top select statement, which had the left join. So depending on, like, if you have a very small amount of data in your database, you are not going to see much of a difference between a non-split query and a split query. But if you're going to pull back a lot of data, you will get a very dramatic performance boost from using the split query. So let's go out, and I'm going to bring up the code again, and we'll get rid of this and go out to split query. So split query, I do have a set of pre-generated files that include the DB context and all of the entities. So I'm a code first, database first fan. I am not a migrations fan. I am not a code first fan of entity framework. I like to design my database beforehand and then generate my code based on that database after I have created it with all the index I need and it kind of molded the way I want it to. I'm not a big fan of going the other way of generating a database from the code that I write. So these are all the generated code files from an existing database called Chinook. Now, if I take a look at the code in here, I again have this as split query. I can actually run this, and you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this second one without the single query. And maybe we can tell that it's going to be a little faster. I don't have a timer on this. Okay. Error. Okay. Well, you know what? Oh, you know why? Because I'm not running the right one inside here. So sorry about that. Should have looked up to see which application or which project I was running. Takes a second to run. Okay. So so as you can see, I'm just spitting out a bunch of stuff. But if I added this, and so if I come up here, I do log what I am grabbing. So let's come up here. You can see that in this one, I'm doing a single select statement. So this is doing an inner join. So this include doesn't do a left join. This actually forces an inner join. And if I do add this as a select query and I run this again, we'll show what the select statements, if we get two select statements coming back or going from Entity Framework Core back to the SQL Server. So we'll run it again, and I will scan back up through the list, go down, and you can see that we do have, now this is interesting. This went from an inner join to a left join. So I don't know why it did that. Again, you're seeing me do this for the first time. I will swear to you that that this came when I was doing my testing over the last couple days. This did come back as two queries. Let's go up and take a look at the first one, the artists and the album, and see what happens up there. Because what supposed to happen is, and we get an inner join. Oh, here's what we do. Okay, so I was confused. So we do have two select statements. So here is the select statement for to get all of the artists in this case, and then we have another select statement that gets the albums based on that artist ID, and that does do an inner join because we have to join the two tables. So we are getting two select statements coming back. Sorry. So that is kind of what happens with a split query. You go from a very complex, potentially complex, very long-running query to having a very small query to start, and then just one or more faster queries to get the included data coming back from the database. So like I said, I don't have a whole lot of data in this Chinook database, so it's not going to show a big performance. But if you were working with millions of rows across all your tables, this would cause and give you a performance boost. So it is something to think about. It's easy to test because all you have to do is add this one directive, add split query. So let's jump back to my slide deck, and we took a look at the demo. So this was kind of interesting when I was going through the new features. I use in most of my demos, I use a logging factory pattern and system to log and to show what's going on in my application. But there is now a simple logging that you can do, and all you have to do is on configuring when you're setting up your DB context options, you just have to say log2, and then you can tell it where to log its debug messages. So in this case, I'm just going to log everything to the console, and it just does a write line with each message. So it's very simple. So let's go out and take a look at that demo. This one isn't really super complex. I will tell you that I'm just going to do a simple query, but I will go into my DB context and I will show that I did do this log2. And in comparison, if I go out to another, let me go out to another, see if I have the code for, maybe I don't have the code for the other way that I do it. So, well, whatever. So this log2, if I run this project, let's switch over to simple logging, and I run this, and I'll show you what we get from this logging. So what you can see is, you can see all these debug statements. So each one of these is, and these found artists are just coming back from the query. But if I take a look at, if I go up to the very top, what I'm seeing is each one of these debug is a log that comes in from Entity Framework that, in this case, in this project, just gets written out to the console. Now you could send it over to a log file, you could send it to another database to hold all those debug statements, but in here, it's going to give you all the information that happens while you're running the application, while you're using EF Core. So we generated this query execution expression. So here's the select statement that we did. It gives you all the information about it. It's going to give you every single piece of debug. So these are everything that it is doing throughout the lifetime of the application. So as you can see, it can get pretty heavy. I wouldn't recommend running this in production. I would recommend that you run this in development and possibly QA, and then at production, I would probably turn it off or remove this code. But you can see that it has a lot of information that's happening even before. And I'm scanning down. Sorry if I'm causing anyone some discomfort watching me quickly go down. You can see that the last statement, it closed the connection to the database Chinook, and then it started kind of going through and spitting out the results and the rest of my code, because if I take a look at this code, what this does is it just goes out and gets the artists. It doesn't include of all the albums, splits, uses a split query, and it just goes through all the artists and prints out the artist name. So that's what this list is down here. Anyone have any questions on this new kind of logging feature? I think it's interesting. If you haven't developed your own logging code or logging system, this is very easy, and and works really well. So have no problem. Like I said, I just wouldn't run it during production. Okay, so let's jump back to my slide deck. So filtered include. Now this is probably one of the nicest new features of Entity Framework Core 5. So before this last release, we couldn't do a filter on the associated on the data that was coming back from the include. So all we could do a filter on the main query, but there was no way to do a query at the secondary level. So this link statement grabs all of our artists, but it's only going to grab the albums that have the word "the" in the title for the albums. And again, we're going to use a split query because I want this link statement to run as efficiently as possible. So in here, the filter is at the secondary level. So let's go back out to my code, and I will bring this up. And I'm not doing anything special on the DB context side or on the code for Entity Framework. All I'm doing is this include. And again, I'm going to go out and get albums where titles contain the word "the" inside that string that represents the title. So if I were to come down and run this. So in here, I'm going to run and get back a list of all the artists. So I'm going to show all the artist name, and then I'm going to show a count next to their name that will give me how many albums came back from the query. So you can see in here that there are some, you either see 0 or 1. I don't think there's actually any 2s in here. So you can see like Orchestra, the Light, and the Enlightenment. Age of Enlightenment has 1. So basically, I'm not, like I said, I'm not filtering on that main list of the artists. I'm actually filtering on that secondary data query, which is the included albums for each one. Which this is kind of nice because, like I said, we didn't have the ability to do this easily in EF Core before 5. So this opens up a lot of very interesting things that we can do. Now let's go up and take a look at the query for this. So we are coming in and we're doing this select. So basically this select will get back all of the artists. And then we will, let's find the query that will, okay. And then here is the query, because we're using that split query. Here's a select statement that will go out based on the artist ID. We are getting an inner join to get back the albums where title, like, and then what the is given in that select statement. So we can see what it's doing here to get back the those albums back from the database. So it's interesting. So now we have the ability to not only filter on the main query, but we get to filter on the include also. So no questions. So this, hopefully this is interesting for you guys. So flexible entity mapping. So how many, I'm gonna ask a question, how many people use views in their databases?
Don't understand the question.
Repeat the question. How many people use tables, but they also use a view? So a view is a type of. So
yeah,
if you do, so if you do, and you have a view that represents maybe a more complex, something that you want to represent for an entity coming out of your database, we now have the ability to get data from a view, but the other CRUD parts, so CRUD is create, update, delete, and create, retrieve. So the retrieve part, the select part, will come in and use the view. As you can see here, the second part inside here says entity.toView. That is telling entity framework for the album. So when we get back an album, we're actually not going to get the data from the album table. We're going to actually get it from a view called album with artist name. And I'll show you that view in a second. But everything else, so if we do a update or a insert or a delete, those will go against the album table because you can't do those functions against a view. So this is really interesting, and I have been waiting for this for a long time. I've got a few databases that, especially my baseball stats database, that I'm going to really use this toView to help out with. So let's go in and take a look at the code for this. So again, I'm just getting back all my albums. I'm just saying select star from albums. That's all I'm getting. I'm not doing anything special like include or split query. But what I have done is in my album, I've added this new property in here, and it's called name. Now that name represents the artist name that created this album. And if I take a look at a database, in my database, in the Chinook database, what I have, takes a second, I have a view in here called, and I'll bring this up in the design. So in here I have a view, and it's a join between the album table and the artist table. So because an album has an artist ID, I can bring in this name, the name of the artist. So for me, I create a lot of APIs. And when I started using the Chinook database, I would create a endpoint to retrieve albums, and I would send back what was in the album table, and I would send back an artist ID. Well, I started thinking, if I needed to know the artist name, because it's pretty important, we all want to know, if we see an album, we want to know what artist created that album. So I thought, why don't I, when I send back the album information, also send back the artist name with the album? It's kind of a natural piece of data that should go back with each album. So I created this view, and this view is called album with artist name. Not very original, I know. And it comes back. And in my album, I had to add this. So if I didn't add this property to the album class, it wouldn't compile, because Entity Framework now says, oh, so album has to have the shape of what's coming out of this view, and originally album didn't have a name property to it, so it would cause a runtime error. It wouldn't cause a compile error, but it would cause a runtime error. So I had to add this name so that the album class was the same shape as the projection from that view called album with artist name. Now in the Chinook, but was someone asking something?
Yeah, this is Jeff again. I was just going to ask a kind of a question. That seems kind of confusing to me, to be honest with you, just from a programmatic standpoint, because now I guess I'm looking at it from a CRUD standpoint, right? Okay, I can read an album and I get the artist name, but how do I update an album now, right? Is it going to go over to that artist table and fill in the name for me, or I guess I'm double dipping on that entity, right? That it's that name isn't really part of that album.
Nope.
It's the artist, right? But I've artificially kind of inserted that based on this view. But if I write one back or create an album, do I have to provide that name? And is it going to put it in another table? Yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know if I like that.
Yeah, you have to know that. I mean, you as the developer you're going to have to know that name isn't going to be sent across the wire. Now, if you want to change the artist, that say you added an album and you associated it to the wrong artist, and you have to go in and update it through a web application that you created, you're not going to change the name, because that has no correlation to the album table. But what you're going to change is the artist ID, like normal. I mean, that's how we're going to change it.
So I guess I guess I would solve this with another entry in my DbContext, right, for albums with artist, and they only have gets, right? No puts. I mean, I'm fine. I wrote the API, but I have a whole team, and now it's a public API, and I mean, that I don't know. It's very confusing.
Sure. Well, how about this example? So I have a database that contains all baseball data from 1873 until last year, and in the player, so I have a view. So say I want to get a player, and that player, I want to return back some of their accumulated stats. So I want to return back with that player a few things. I want to know if they're a hitter. I want the number of hits, maybe number of home runs, number of RBIs. Well, all that data is spread across all of the records in a table called batting, which contains a season by season the season stats for all hitters, for batters. And conversely, there's a table called pitching, which contains a record for each player's individual seasons. So if I want an accumulation, I would have to go in and do another call. Well, for me, do I want to go back, if I'm calling an API, do I want to go back and call this API again just for some additional data that I want all the time anyway? So think about it from the other way. If I'm a developer that's consuming an API, and I want to get we're going to go back to the albums and artists. I'm going to go and get all the albums that I search for. Why would I have to then go out and call, if I got, say I said, give me all the heavy metal bands from the 1980s. And I got back 37.
I get the read. It's just the property that I can't use on my entity is a problem to me. I would have a different entity with basically only a get on the controller on the API that would denormalize that data, right? So that I can get back a player with stats object, right? But there's no put, there's no get, right? But to me, that's less confusing, I guess, from that standpoint, because now I've got a batting average that I can never update. How do I update that? It's on the object, and so I don't know.
Yeah, you just have to be aware.
Less efficient than includes.
Yeah. Well, it's a little easier for like APIs. Now, in a regular web application, sure, you might not need that, because you may in the way that you create your web application have a primary and a secondary call for certain things like that. So sure. I'm just giving this as an example. If you did need to have a more complex representation for an entity, but you still could save back the information about that entity and not have to worry about not have to write a bunch of custom code that took in a view but then saved the data back to the right database table. So
yeah, fair enough.
It gives you options. It gives you the flexibility to do this, to do some things that you don't have to write a bunch of complex custom code for. So
okay.
So I totally agree where you're coming from. If another developer came in and they saw this, they would go name, but I don't see name in the database, and right. I didn't take a look at the DB context code. So they may get confused and not know what's going on. I totally agree with that. So you kind of have to know what the code is doing, so you kind of understand the back and forth between the database and the consumer of that data.
You can also make the property read only.
Yeah,
to
you can
convey
make
that
the
it,
property. Yeah, you can come
to
in.
convey that it's not a writable column.
Yeah, I could come in here and I could put like maybe a comment on this, or I could do
Does that work with serialization? Is it going to serialize and deserialize property if it's read only?
don't think so. I mean,
I
it's
don't think so
read
either.
only anyway. It's going to be read only anyway, so it doesn't
I
really
know
matter.
EF6 will work if it's a private setter. I'm not sure about core, but EF6 would work if it's a private setter on that property.
There you go. That might work.
Yeah, but if it's private, if it's yeah, I guess you could get rid of the set. I haven't tried that. I'll
No,
have to take a look.
just make the setter private.
So yeah, I guess,
So now you know you can't set it, so you can't change it.
yeah, it's gonna, and
Again,
it will, true.
And I know Dapper will work with that for sure, and JSON.NET does not, but
Yep. Well, I mean, Dapper's a whole nother ball game. So love
Again,
Dapper, but Dapper, I don't even know if Dapper has a way to use a view for a read, but then,
well, again, every call is independent for Dapper, so you'd have.
Oh, that's true. It is independent.
And again,
in
SQL Server, you can write to views.
Yeah, that's
you can.
You can, but then you have to do some. Yeah, but you have to do some stuff on the back end.
Not always. If it's a simple view, you don't need to.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, good luck with that, right?
I do it all the time.
Okay, well, no, that's cool.
We do complex triggers and stuff to get around some of this because we don't have this capability in EF6. Yeah. This is really cool to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like it. It's just confusing if you're not the guy writing it, but yeah, I get it.
We do this stuff all the time already, and we have to use triggers and stuff on the back end to trick Entity Framework into making it work.
Nice. Yep.
Good. Yep. So, okay. Good discussion. I like having these discussions. They're better than me talking for an hour along the way. So let's jump back. So identity resolution. So I don't know if you guys know, there's a thing called as no tracking. So as no tracking will do just what it says. It will tell Entity Framework Core that for this entity that it shouldn't track any changes. Now, I use as no tracking a lot when in regards to APIs, because in APIs I'm not tracking changes that I'm occurring in like a traditional web application, which then I call the save, and it sends all the track changes to the database in one update, batch update. So, but with identity resolution allows you to this no tracking with identity resolution allows you to still get if there are any changes in there. So if I go out and make a bunch of calls, what this will stop doing is getting redundant data over and over again. So if it has the data from another call and that is in some cache, it will actually not go back out to the database to get that information, get that data. It will just send it to the query that is using this entity. Now, if this sounds confusing to you, it is a little confusing to me. I had to read it a number of times. It's what it will do is just, it will stop the database from going back out to the back end to get the same data over and over again. But it will still not cause tracking to occur on this entity. The downside is if any of the data has changed on the server and you're still getting data back from the stored data on the client side, there is no indicator. There's nothing that goes out and checks to see if the data that it's returning to you has been changed and if it should go out and do a refresh of that data. So just know that this could be, if you're working with a very active database that gets data updated constantly, like across all your data points, I wouldn't use this call. But if you're using data that doesn't get updated very much, maybe it's a catalog, like with albums don't really change. The details about the albums don't really change. So you might use this to save on some traffic going across the wire. Now this one doesn't have a demo because it's just a way of not getting data back from the database. So required one-to-one dependence. So we've all seen that you can have a property that is required on a entity. In this case, again, it's with the album. So you can see that the title for an album is required, and it has a max length of 160 characters. But what we couldn't have is we couldn't say an associated property, a foreign key was required before EF Core 5, at least not through the code for the DB context. Now we could write that into validation code, or if you were checking this through business rules and stuff, we could flag it and send it back as an error. But as you can see on the last entity dot, on the last line for this for the model builder for the album, you can see that this entity has a one-to-one relationship between an album and an artist. And now we can now say that that relationship is required. Before, when I generated this code, reversed engineered the code from the database, from the Chinook database, it didn't have that is required for the relationship, the foreign key between an album and an artist. I had to add that in. So this will not be generated when you run the DB scaffold call for when you reverse engineer your database. So you're going to have to go through all of your one-to-one relationships and say, is this relationship required? Because some relationships don't have to be required, but some do. Like I do want an artist to be associated to every album. And if it doesn't, then EF Core will give you back an error if you try to create an album without an artist ID, or if you try to save a album without an associated artist ID. So again, don't really have code for this because it's just the design of the DB context happening. So I find this is interesting, especially to cut down on business rules, on having to write complex business rules to enforce this type of constraint and requirement. And I do have code that shows all this, so if you do want to go out and see the code, it's just not going to I haven't written any code to cause an error on this.
So Woody, a question.
The next thing, yes.
Quick question on the required relationship there. So, I personally would rather have things in code than put that strain on my database just to throw, to keep me out of doing something that I should be checking for without making a database call. But is like the valid is valid? Is that going to tell me before I make the database call that is required? Like you can check if it is valid, right, on my entity before I send that off. Would that say, no, this is not valid? You have to have this artist.
Yeah, so this would actually, you would get an error back when you were creating the actual entity object in memory.
Okay.
So if you created a new album entity or new album object, and you didn't have a artist ID assigned, you couldn't save it, or you couldn't put it into the change tracking inside Entity Framework. Now, I will push back a little bit, because for me, I would much rather have my DB context contain as much of my constraints and my application knowledge and my business rules inside it, so I don't have to do that outside. Because if I were to create this DB context and I gave it to one of my junior developers, and I said, oh, don't forget that and I didn't have this is required, and I would have to tell the junior developer, well, either through documentation or through verbal, just letting them know, well, just remember that a album has to have an artist assigned to it. In this case, I already have it set up. It's going to enforce that no matter who's developing against it. So in that case, for me, I would much rather have as much information in one place inside my DB context as possible. And there's a lot of other stuff that I can do. I can, like, if I showed you all the stuff that you can do from EF Core 3.1 and 3.0, there's tons of stuff that I can enforce at the DB context level that make my life a lot easier, and as an architect, potentially, and it makes all of my developers' lives much easier because they don't have to remember all these rules.
Yeah, I like the idea, and I'm certainly in favor of this. I guess I'm just trying to figure out where it executes, right? And if you're saying that's the context, I don't have to make a DB connection to find out that that foreign key doesn't exist yet, right? That's a very heavy way to enforce the rules. That's what I was getting at.
it doesn't enforce it when a database connection. It enforces it when you actually try to bring that object into the DB context.
Gotcha. Okay. That's much better. I'm much more comfortable with that, right?
It doesn't check. Like if you put some artist ID that didn't exist in the database, it would still let that in, because to Entity Framework Core, you are giving what at least it assumes is a valid artist ID. Now,
Right.
if it takes that and sends it back to the database server, it will, and that ID ID doesn't match an existing artist ID in the database, then that will be sent back as an error back to the application.
Totally get it, and that I'm happy that it's enforcing that, max length and all that kind of stuff. That should be I don't have to make a round trip to the database. That's just a heavy way to do that, right? That's why I'm putting as much as I can in there. Again, just getting started with this here, so I appreciate the indulgence here in the discussion.
Oh, no problem. No problem. Ask any questions. So the .NET Core team, just in general, the .NET Core team has added a lot of new counters and a lot of new insight at the CLI level to get information back about your application. So if you go and you install the .NET Counters CLI module, the top line is how you install it. You just do a .NET tool install global. You want to install these .NET Counters at a global level so all of your applications can use them. And it can be called, because this is actually going to be called from a command line or from PowerShell or something. So, and then the second line is what you actually call from Microsoft Terminal or the command prompt. And what this does is I'm telling it to monitor Entity Framework Core, and that -P represents the process ID. So in this case, it's a process ID of 21556. And then underneath, you'll see that this is the what comes in and gets shown from the .NET Counter tool. It will actually show you for the Entity Framework Core side, it will show you kind of number of active DB context queries. If you have any errors or failures, it'll tell you all those. But this is all done at the CLI level, where in the past, a lot of this functionality was baked into Visual Studio or other IDEs. Like I use Rider, and Rider has its own monitoring stuff. But this is kind of nice because you can actually run this as part of your CI/CD pipeline and use it to check certain things, or to get, and you can save it off into an Excel spreadsheet and then store it someplace or email it to someone every time a build happens. So I'm gonna go out and show a demo of this. So let me go up here, and I'm going to run, I just have this little demo application that I run. And have to find it. So let me just run it from here. So I'm going to run this. I'm going to start a command line. And I'm going to go get, so I don't have to type this out. And hopefully this process ID has not changed. So I'm going to run this line of code. Okay, so in this command line, I'm going to run that line of code I showed in my slide deck. Okay, well, failure to start. So yeah, it probably did change. The process ID has probably changed. So let me go out and get that process ID. Oh, I know what I did. I can't run it. So the interesting thing is you can't run it from your IDE. You actually have to run it from the actual executable. So it's a slight gotcha for, so bear with me for 1 second. Let me go out and get this little executable off. It's just a console app. Okay, so here is it running, and then my other, here is it. Let's see if it finds it now. No. Again, let me go out and get the process ID, and yes, it did change. Always does. So 1104. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, now we got it. And it is getting a bunch of information. I haven't actually executed this, so this little demo application is waiting for me to press a key to start. Now in here, I haven't actually done any entity framework code, so it is just giving me back the system runtime information. So, but if I press any key and kick this off, you can see that now the thing is collecting information. You can see that going out and getting Microsoft.Entity Framework Core, and okay, it is done. I can stop this, and what I have here is, while this was running, I could have seen all this information. So as you're running your application, you can actually, I mean, this is kind of a crude demo, but you can run this CLI counter application to see what's going on in your application. So not only can you get some of the system runtime, but you can get also the entity framework core. So as your application is running, maybe it's a web application or a web API application, you can, as long as you can get the process ID or the process number, you can run this and see what's going on inside your application, and it will update real time. And you can even tell it to wait and say, like, only check every 3 seconds or check every 10 seconds. So it doesn't constantly go get that information from the application. So it's interesting. I like it because it doesn't depend on any IDE. I can just run it. Even if I don't have a development environment running at the time, I can just kick off a command line or kick off Microsoft Terminal or PowerShell and call it, and it will give me the information I'm looking for. And there's lots of different counters. Entity Framework Core is just one of the different counters. You can take a look at the number of, like, details about the what? I'm trying to think, like memory consumption. You can take a look at lots of different counters within here. I was just showing that you can take a look at EF Core as one of them. Let me go back to my slide deck, and I'm coming towards the end. Save changes, interception for auditing. Now, this is an interesting one. There's lots of times that you may have a need for all of your CRUD calls need to be audited. And whoever was saying before that they use complex triggers, in the past, I've had requirements where I had to store every single call to the database in an audit table for legal purposes or just for auditing purposes in the future. It's a pain in the butt to do all that at a trigger level, because you have to set up triggers, 4 triggers for every table for each CRUD call, for each CRUD part. But now we can, at the DB context layer, we can add this interceptors that will intercept as the it's actually as the commands are coming through EF Core, the interceptor will grab them and take the information, and you can store it off into another database through a secondary audit DB context. And we'll take a look at the code to do that. So if I take a look at saved intercept, I have a number of different files in here. So I have my program, which is just a simple, I am just going out and I am adding a new blog. So basically I'm gonna create a new blog record and put the blog record into my blog DB context, and then I'm going to remove a post and then add another post. I'm going to do some functionality against this blog database. But at the blog context, I do have, like I said, I added this interceptor, which the interceptor is in this code file. And what this one will do is, so if anything happens, like as I'm doing any changes, this will actually allow me to grab that event data and store it off into a DB context. As you can see up here, I have a connection string, and I am going and setting up a audit context. So this is a different DB context than the blog. So actually I am storing the blog information to a blog table and the audit information to an audit database. And as you can see here, here is the DB context for the audit database. It basically just has a class that stores an ID for the table, the audit ID that's coming out, start time, end time, if it's succeeded, if there was an error message, so the entries. So basically this is just grabbing anything that Entity Framework is doing across the wire and saves that information out to an audit database. We can run this. Doesn't do anything that spectacular. It just goes and does a few database calls. Once it compiles, yep, you can see that it inserted, so it inserted a post, it inserted another post, it updated the blog, deleted the post. So if I go out to my,
Did have an error there.
did I get an error? Maybe that's, oh, cannot insert explicit value for identity column. Oh, that's probably, yeah, because, yeah, I was getting that before. It just, I think it's because there's already a record out there with
Gotcha.
that, potentially with that. But if the big thing is if I come in here, excuse me, to my database, and here is that demo Interceptor. They have the tables. Here are the tables with like the blog and the posts. But then I have my audit table that contains my entity audit and my save changes audit. So if I come out here and take a look at the data out here, what it's showing is the audit message that happened. So inserting blog with ID. So I find this kind of interesting because to do this 20 years ago when I was doing stuff like this, when I needed an audit table for some databases I was working with, either you had to do a lot of work in your application side, or you had to set up some complex triggers to then go out and send that data to another database or to another table. So with very little code, I mean, there's not much code in this auditing Interceptor. It's less than a couple hundred lines of code. Yeah, 153 lines of code in this whole file. I can basically save all of the information that EF Core is doing against my database into an audit, so that if my client or if my employer needs to go back and audit something, it's very simple to do.
Yeah,
So,
this is kind of interesting, right? But you know, one of the things that I've been kind of looking at. So the first thing I'm kind of endeavoring on here is what I would consider master data, right? Right. Update occasionally, but read 99% of the time, right? So very slow moving. And I don't know if you have any experience, but I mean, does EF support temporal tables?
not that I am aware of
Okay.
at this time.
It's on the roadmap for EF Core 6.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah,
Because
now we know.
that's a nice way. So I want to be able to have the history, right? But you know, now I'm kind of doing that. Now I got to join my two tables. It seems like a very elegant way. The SQL engine's probably going to do it better than I can, at least more efficiently, hopefully. But yeah, it's just kind of curious. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So, and that was the last feature. So I'll go through this. If you, I already see that I have some mistakes on this slide, but if I have some information, if you go out to my demo and download this, you can get this information. But I just always put the resources at the end, so where you can find the documentation for EF Core. If you want to follow EF Core on Twitter, they are EF Magic Unicorns. So, and actually, if you install the EF, the Entity Framework Core tools globally to your machine, and you call .NET space EF, it will show you a ASCII unicorn in that call. So they, for some reason, they like their magic unicorns on the EF Core team. But there's also EF Core is 100% open source, so you can see all the code out in GitHub, and then all the code that I have for these demos and the slide deck are out underneath my GitHub account. So my GitHub account is just like my Twitter account. It's just C Woodruff, and the name of this repo that all this lives in is EF Core 5 demos. Now, if you want to take a look at the EF Core 3 demos, I have another repo for those. So you can find both of those. And there's some really interesting things like DB context pooling. I don't show that in this, but if you don't know what DB context pooling is, you have to use it, because it will save your butt on performance and memory. So trust me, just go out and take a look at it. It is quite amazing what it can do. So, and with that, it's a little after 8. So like I said, if anyone has questions, you can email me or ping me on Twitter. I will answer any questions. So I appreciate everyone being here virtually. I know it's not the same as in person, and I wish we could do all this in person, because for me, it's kind of hard talking to a camera right there instead of 9 or 10 people out there. If there's still 9 or there's 13 of us out there. But anyone have any other questions? I'll try to answer any questions that people have in general about any Entity Framework Core.
Just off the bat, you kind of started out, Woody, with I'm not a
Oh, I think I lost you. I can't hear you.
fan of migrations, I guess. Is that you?
I am not a fan of migrations. No.
You had mentioned early on that you're not a fan of migrations. I guess is that you've stubbed your toe too many times, there's holes in it, or just I choose not to code that way, or I guess, should I start down that path, I guess, or is it just a big void?
So for me, I have found too many databases that people generate from migrations and from code first. The code first style of Entity Framework. Many of those databases are not very efficient. They don't have indexes other than the primary index and possibly so what I'm saying is, unless you know what you're doing and you build in all of the database constraints and efficiencies into your migration scripts or into your POCO objects, into your DB context, you're going to have you could possibly have a very inefficient database that just naturally runs slow. So that's why for me, I just build the database first, because I have the philosophy, if you don't build your house on solid ground, your house is going to fall apart. And for me, a database is the foundation of every application. And you wouldn't want a DBA to go, well, I build my database and then I generate my application from my database, and I don't really worry about, I just kind of build it and go on. Well, as a developer, you wouldn't want a DBA just to quickly generate pardon my French, a half-ass application that sits on top of the database. So why should we as developers generate half-ass databases from our application code? So
yeah, I guess it's a two-edged sword, right? But to me, if the code is in migrations, I now have a code record of that in version control, right? That gives me a clear path. And to your point, right? There's no way that would make it to production without even if I put the new date table and stuff in the database, and I have some new logic, I'm going to run some regressions on that thing there and a bunch of queries at it to check execution plans. So that I would build that into the context then, if in fact I went down the migration path, I guess, to make sure.
Well, you would be surprised what kind of databases I've found in production.
I probably wouldn't be. No, fair enough. And if you just say, hey, I'm going to migrate, here's my entity, go, I totally get that, right? But I guess I'm asking, they are capable if you take the time to do them properly.
Yes. If you know what you're doing, and you build it correctly, then yes. But if you go just by watching the Microsoft demos,
sure,
that you can see on YouTube or Channel 9, they don't really go into the details. Just like, I do this talk about like new things about EF Core, because most of this stuff you're never going to see people demo, right? Because it's not the quick, dirty, get something stood up and working halfway decent. I mean, all this stuff is kind of, and I know some of this stuff is just small, but it really improves your application. It can improve the validation or the performance, or allow you to write very efficient data access code. And Microsoft gets kicked around for EF Core a lot because people don't really understand or don't dig into some of the weeds for EF Core. I mean, EF Core is pretty much now on par with Dapper from a performance standpoint, if you code it correctly. I can get EF Core that in some scenarios actually exceeds the performance of Dapper, which 3 years ago, when no one would ever have thought that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time and the insights, Woody.
Yeah, no problem, Jeff.
Thanks for
all your questions. So you make this, people like you make these talks interesting, because I actually get to bounce back and forth. So, and it's just, like I said, it's just not me talking for over an hour. So, but I hope someone got something out of it. One of these, I always say, out of all these 9 different things that I showed, someone should be able to get something to take back and improve their application or improve their API back at work. So,
Thank you.
And more
Yeah,
importantly, enhance their skill set and their resume.
yeah,
Absolutely.
so
Thanks again, Woody. Highly appreciate it. And thanks again for everyone for making it an interactive meeting. Just have a couple wrap-up announcements. Just as a reminder, if you have any last-minute questions for Woody, please feel free to enter them in chat, and we can address those. In the meantime, I'd like to share some of the upcoming events that are going to be happening virtually. So with the virtual user groups, and by the way, there's our link in chat for all these events that are posted on my blog, as well as the link to the YouTube channel where this meeting will be posted. So let's cover the events. On April 6th is the Ohio North Database Training User Group, and they're going to be meeting online, and they're going to be discussing visualization using Power BI. On April 15th is the Great Lakes User Group.net, and there, I believe the topic is going to be machine learning.net, if I'm not mistaken. On Wednesday, April 21st is going to be the Hudson Software Craftsmanship Group, and the meeting information can be found at meetup.com for the Hudson Software Craftsmanship Group, as well as all the other groups for that matter. And then on April 22nd is going to be Stacy Cashmore, and she's going to be discussing Azure command lines. And that meeting will be held on Thursday, the 22nd, and that meeting information is already up on meetup.com website. With regards to virtual conferences, on April 20th is the Global AI Night Cleveland. Although it's titled for Cleveland, it is a virtual conference. So it's going to be held on Tuesday, the 20th. It's going to start at 4 p.m. and run till 9 p.m. Online, free of charge, and a variety of topics related to AI and Azure. On April 24th is the Global AI Student Conference, and you can find the link for that at aiconf.education. That is also a free event to attend. On May 4th is the Minnesota Developers Conference. That's going to be held virtually as well. And on May 7th is the familiar event of Star Trek. Unfortunately, last year it was canceled due to COVID. This year they are back, but virtual, and they are free of charge to attend. There are tickets still available, so feel free to go ahead to the link startrek.com and register there. And then last but not least, on May 10th is Sql Day Poland. And if you recall, I always push the SQL Saturday events and advertise them. And they were sponsored by PASS, or the Professional Association for SQL Server. Unfortunately, that organization has since folded, but the effort still goes on within the community. And so they have started various takes on SQL for conferences. So one of them is SQL Day, and the link for that is sqlday.pl for Poland. And you can enter in the /en at the end of the URL for English instructions. So all these links are posted on my blog, and you'll find a link for that over on the over in the chat window. Also, another thing I always like to cover is jobs. So if you're looking for work, you can always check out techsystems.com for some of the postings that they have available. But more importantly, when we used to meet in person, I always like to ask who's hiring. So if you're in a place of employment that's hiring, feel free to speak up or enter it into chat or email me later. So let me just pause for a second. Is anyone working at a place where they're hiring right now?
yeah, we have like 400 openings right now at Quicken Loan. So if anyone wants to talk about jobs at Quicken Loans, reach out to me. We do have an office in Cleveland, down in the same building or right around the casino downtown.
Excellent, 400 positions, that's quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I take it ranges in various levels, junior to senior, correct?
Yeah, we go from what we call associate software engineers. We need all all levels, all the way up to architects and directors and leaders, and yeah, you name it, we need it. We need data people, data science people, software developers. So, yep.
Good to know. And I know you've been with Quicken Loans for a few years, correct?
Yep, couple years.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good to know. So if you're still with them, obviously it says a lot about the position and
Yeah.
that you're enjoying
Great
it there.
company.
Excellent.
Good company.
Very good. Anyone else hiring? Okay. If you think of a job opening or you come across one, feel free to share it with me, and likewise, I will share it with a group. Also, same thing goes for if you're looking for work. Obviously, you may not be able to advertise it publicly, but feel free to email me, and I can serve as a go-between connecting people with work. Lastly, if you have any questions that might come up later, my contact information, snasser@nistechnologies.com. You can also find me on Twitter, and there's the link to my blog where I posted all the tech events that I just went through, samnasser.blogspot.com. And as always, I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. So with that, thanks again to Chris, and thank you all for attending, and hope you all have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.